My name is Captain Michael Sommer, Sommer.
Can you tell us what happened with this coach y'all caught?
Basically, our investigation started in late March when a child courageously told a parent, and the parent came forward giving us information, which led to, as you can tell, since we're almost to July, a rather lengthy investigation that ended up with us discovering multiple victims in multiple jurisdictions. Detective Drake did a fantastic job piecing a story together that was one of those, well, I heard this, well, I heard that, and was able to piece it together to where we finally have two solid victims that had unfortunate circumstances with this gentleman.
That was one of the things that stood out to me was reading that affidavit. It just seemed like over and over and over again, you guys talk to people and they say, well, we heard of this person and we heard of this person, and it just keeps expanding. You guys think there could be more people out there?
The reason we believe that is because this story goes back almost 10 years to what we pieced together to be the beginning. You know, some things were weird but relatively innocent, so to speak, just odd comments and all, and you know, it was getting to those victims that actually had something happen to them and finding them. Our concern is that we may not have found them all.
That being said, I'm sure you still want people to come forward, even if they didn't have anything that would be considered nuisance, if they had an odd interaction.
Any information that anybody has, we will certainly welcome and take a look at to see if there is anything there.
I also had a question about the case that started in Lake County, got forwarded over to Marion County. I understand that's not your jurisdiction. But there was a case that got moved over, and then just nothing ever came of it. So DCF investigated, they found something had happened, and this guy was never charged.
I'm not familiar with all the details of that. A lot of times things get reported in one jurisdiction, and when they make it to the ultimate jurisdiction, it can't be proven. You can't find the people. I don't know exactly what took place in that particular instance, but I've seen it time and time again. You get something that was reported that happened years ago. It gets to here now. You can't find the principals involved, and unfortunately, without those disclosures, you can't make a case.
Now, I know there were like 3 named locations. Can you describe the nature of his work? Was he volunteering as a baseball coach at all 3 of those places?
He was a baseball coach for 2 leagues that I know of, and involved with youth groups at a couple of area churches.
And how long has he been working with them? Since 2016?
That's to the best that we can figure out, yes, because everybody's saying it was either baseball interaction or through a church interaction that he met these young men.
You mentioned multiple victims. Is there anything that you can share about those victims' ages and numbers? What number of victims that is?
Right now, we know of 3 victims, 2 that we charged here in this case. There's 1 that's pending in another jurisdiction. And then Detective Drake is still working through a whole bunch of the tendrils of this thing that have spread out. That's what we know right now.
One of the things that was in the press release that was sent out earlier today is that this whole thing started after a parent of one of the teens actually reported that to police. What would be your message to parents out there who, hear something from their son or daughter?
Be involved in your kids' lives. Know what's going on. Know those signs when a child shows changes or shows apprehensions around somebody that maybe they used to trust, or in the case of, and I'll just use baseball as the example, the child all of a sudden that's been playing Little League for 6 years doesn't want to play Little League anymore and can't really give you a reason. Just look for those signs. And parents need to trust their instincts by being involved in the things that, generally when something makes you take pause and think about something, there might be something there. That's when it's time to talk to your children and ask those questions.
You brought up how you have to have enough evidence to bring charges forward. A lot of these things happened quite a while back, ordinance from 2020. You brought up some of this happened in 2015, 2016. How do you guys gather evidence that you can bring to the state attorney so they can actually land a conviction for something that happened so long ago?
You gather as much as you can. You double check as much as you can. In the case of the current juvenile, we used our local CPT group at Kimberly's, and there was forensic interviews done where they use their specialized techniques that kind of bolster the things that the child is telling us, and then you put that all together with any data you can find, there's just, in this case, there's just so much. You build it and paint that picture the best you can, and then ultimately we'll see what happens from there. There's enough to arrest, and we'll see what happens as the judicial process plays out.
Can you elaborate on the concern for parents when it comes to that? Because we're talking about someone who was involved with the church, someone who had there's a trust that goes into that person to be involved with the children's lives, right? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that concern for parents now who might be watching this?
Like I said, parents need to be involved and they know their children better than anybody else. They know the changes that they see in their children when something's wrong. Trust those instincts and talk to that child. Be involved. For me, like when my kids were young and played sports and things like that, I was always there. I was always involved. I was always watching. I saw when there were changes towards things, whether it was their struggles with a particular sport because it wasn't their best, or mental, but I was there. I was involved in it. I was around it. I saw those people, and I kept my eyes open.
Going back to the churches and the sportsplex, were they ever made aware of any concerns that parents possibly brought up to them or any reports?
Not to my knowledge.
Are they working with you all right now to kind of spread the message to encourage victims if there are more?
Well, and to be perfectly honest, we put this out pretty quick when it happened because of our fear that there may be more because of the time frame and the different organizations. So I don't know exactly where Detective Drake is with talking to those principals in the case to figure out what's going on exactly.
And then, real quick, going back to the Lake County Sheriff's Office case, I know you say you don't know the full details, but I think DCF mentioned the child was removed from his home. Was that child related to him, or?
My understanding it was a foster child.
Okay, foster child. Do you know how old the child was at that time?
I do not.
Anything else you'd like to say while we've got you here chatting to the community?
No, just parents, be aware of who your children are involved with, be involved, notice those cues, notice those things, know your child. And then while it's completely irrelevant to this particular situation, where's the child's biggest danger area? All those devices we give them. Know what your kids are doing online.
I do have one other thing. A lot of the narrative in this it talks a lot about things that would be considered creepy but more minor. So the guy has his hand allegedly on a minor's thigh for a long time, and those still need to be brought forth so they don't escalate, would be my thinking. For when you guys are trying to hear from people in the community, even if they hadn't.
The thing I would stress is when it looks creepy. I mean, it's one thing. The child hits a home run and gets met at the plate and gets the big high five and everything, but when the hands are constantly on or things like that, or there's a lot of really intimate things like the kissing that was alluded to and those kind of things, those are the kind of things that parents need to be looking at. Is this right? Is this proper for the situation?
Thank you.
I don't know if you mentioned, but just that we're looking for if anybody has any similar experiences with coach to come forward.
Absolutely. We would encourage anybody that's had any kind of similar experiences or feels like they had a similar experience, come forward, talk to us. We'll figure out if it is or isn't something that goes along with what's happened now.
And what was your title again?
Captain.
Captain.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Thank you.